Welcome to the Discover Uncover podcast series. We hope you come away with a deeper sense of Michigan's history and how the objects and stories of the past relate to today's culture, customs, and society. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the Discover Uncover podcast series.
Welcome back to the Discover Uncover podcast here at the Sloan Museum. My name is Sarah Dickinson. I am the registrar and the exhibits liaison, and with me here is our curator of collections, Jeff Woodcox.
Hi Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a wonderful, sunny, beautiful day outside. You wouldn't know it down here, but you know.
Yeah, outside of windowless basements.
Yes.
It's a really beautiful day.
Folks, if you don't know, as collections people, we don't really get windows. It kind of goes along with the job, so we take our sun when we can get it, right?
Exactly. We're vitamin D deficient, but we're happy.
We are.
Yeah. What did you want to talk about today?
I thought we could talk about maybe some of the artifacts that have been recently donated to Sloan.
Yeah.
I thought that some of these might surprise some people.
Absolutely. So today's topic is kind of about contemporary collecting, which people don't really know a lot about. I think people think of museums a lot as places that collect things that are historic, but when they think about historic, they think of things that are old. And that's not always the case. History is happening every single day, and so part of our job is to record things that are going on now, especially things that might be overlooked that'll become important later. So we have some stuff with us today that has been contemporarily collected, that is objects that are modern, that we're trying to make sure that we collect so that we can preserve that historic record, so that people in the future aren't looking at this giant gap in time, like where'd 2024 go?
I mean, part of the motivation for that too is a lot of these materials now are readily available, but who's to say in 20 years, 50 years, that we're actually going to be able to find things like this, and we can actually connect with the people who are part of this story and get more details from them. So that's why it's kind of important.
Exactly, and it's nice to be able to have the ability to connect with people when that feeling and the events are still fresh in people's minds. They have those details kind of preserved in their memory. Whereas when you collect things from the past that are really far in the past, you know, that might not be there and some of the details get lost.
One thing that I think surprises people often about what I personally love to collect is that it seems like it's really mundane. And it's like, oh, that doesn't belong in a museum. But you got to think about it 100 years from now. What's it going to be like for someone stepping into a museum and seeing, oh, wow, look at this shirt that was worn 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Then it has a whole totally different dimension. And this is also about finding your voice in the historical record. You know, we're keeping things not just for a few years, we're talking the time scale of centuries. And that's kind of a legacy for someone to have.
It is, and I think it's also important because historically museums have collected things that belong to the rich or the people who are very well known, and it's very nice to be able to collect things that show the everyday person's life and their lived experience, and that'll be important, again, centuries from now. And it's something that we're only just starting to see come into museums historically too, so it's exciting.
I know that some of those things are very near and dear to your heart, and you were very heavily involved in collecting them. Do you want to talk about some of those things?
Absolutely. So some of these things are things that I personally sought out because I knew that we needed to be doing more to collect in those areas. And some of them are things that just kind of happened to fall into my lap. So regardless, we're so happy to have them. So I'm going to go grab some and show you.
Lovely.
Alrighty, so this is one of the first things that was a contemporary piece that I collected while working here. So this is a statue that came from a local Hindu temple. I didn't even know that we had a local Hindu temple to collect from. They reached out to us because these were some of the older statues and they recently had been able to commission new ones for their temple, and they offered us these. They are granite, they are very heavy. Each of them corresponds to a celestial body, and so this was one of the first things that we were able to collect from a contemporary community that's not necessarily like historic in the way that people would consider historic. It's not necessarily very old. I think they had said that they collected them in like the 80s when they first commissioned them, but they still are important and they tell the story that is important to this community. And these are the first objects that I think we have generally in the collection from that community. So it's especially important.
So there are a couple of really interesting things to me about these artifacts. I think there's, what, 9 of them all together?
I think there are 9 of the main ones. This is actually one of the smaller ones because I can actually pick it up. And then we had, I think, 2 or 3 additional ones that are smaller.
Okay. So my understanding of this is this actually came directly from India, right?
Yes. Yes, they were commissioned, as far as I'm aware, by the temple from a local artist back in India. They had initially thought that they would be much smaller in scale and size and weight. And so when they arrived, it was a little surprising, but as I'm sure you can imagine, this is not a cheap thing to get done. So they were recently, a few years ago, able to commission new ones. And so the ones that replaced them were more the appropriate size for what they were looking for. And these ones came to our collection. So our former collections manager and I went out and we took the museum pickup truck and we grabbed the statues. And they were such a pleasure to work with, the people at the temple. And we're so lucky to be able to kind of build these community connections and partnerships and get to know our community better as we do this work.
That's definitely a part of collecting, is you have to build a relationship and build trust with people, especially with community groups that maybe haven't been represented in the collection before.
Exactly.
If somebody comes up to you and says, give me something that's really precious to you, you're not just going to do that unless you know that you can trust the people. So
Exactly.
there is a dimension of relationship building.
There is. I think it's a common misconception that like we're out here actively collecting in a way where we're like demanding people's personal belongings or effects that are really sentimental and personal to them. And while those objects are great, and for some of them, if people wanted to donate them, if they were within our collecting scope, we'd be happy to take them. I think that that assumption is erroneous. We're not trying to, take people's stuff that's special to them that they're still using or that they still want to have in their homes. But we are happy to preserve a record of people and their loved ones and the lives they lived in our community. So that's what we're trying to do with this.
So my understanding of these deities, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to display these in a gallery, we would need to orient them to specific compass directions, right?
Yes. So the celestial bodies that each of the deities corresponds to also corresponds to a cardinal direction. And so when displaying them, they would need to be placed facing that cardinal direction. And they also have stands. I did not bring the one for this because it's very heavy. Basically, this base here slots into the stand, and so they're able to stand. I would not have to hold all 13 of them. Yeah. So the next collection, I'm very excited to show you.
Okay, I can't wait to see it. All right, so tell me about these items.
So these are probably my favorite things that I've collected so far for our collection. These ones I went out and personally sought out last year at the Flint Pride Fest. And it was so exciting to be able to be a part of it because these are the first objects that we have collected that represent explicitly the queer community in Flint. And since then, we've done a little bit more collecting in that area. I'd love to do more, but it's so exciting to finally have something that represents the community in that way. So we have a little pride flag, and we have a magnet from the Flint Repertory Theater, and we have a little pin that says 2023 Pride in Flint. And it's just so exciting to finally be able to represent my community and to be able to add these objects into the collection so that they'll be preserved for years to come, so that when people are looking and they're trying to find themselves in our collection, they can do that, which wasn't the case before.
Certainly, and my understanding is there's also some literature that was collected as well.
There is. So I'm excited. We collected some literature. Basically, they are bound volumes of collections of a person who is a queer Black person in Flint, and they collected the stories of other queer Black people in Flint. And each story was put into basically a magazine, and then he compiled them into 3 separate volumes. And so we've collected them so that they are now in our collection so that those stories are preserved, because each of those stories represents an individual who lived in Flint, whose lived experience was defined by their Blackness, their queerness. And now those stories are available for people to access in our reading room. They are available for the historical record. They're preserved. And for a community that has historically been underrepresented, it's so exciting to finally be able to make sure that those stories are told and they're preserved in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that I get passionate about with this work is ensuring that people have a voice in our collection and can see themselves reflected not only in the collection but in the exhibits that we have on display.
Yeah, and when you think these are contemporary objects, it's true, but when looking back in the historical record for especially examples of queer people, so much of it is guesswork, is like Emily Dickinson never got married, maybe she was gay. But this shows that there was explicit evidence of people being queer, existing in this space in these ways. And hopefully that is something that people can find representation in, they can find community in, and that we can continue to represent our community in this way.
Absolutely. It's a snapshot of our community at a certain point in time. And that's something that it may be really important to someone who's researching our community in 150 years to have a very complete snapshot of what it was like here
Exactly.
in 2024.
And some of these experiences can be so isolating and it can feel so lonely. And so it's great to know that people will be able to look back and understand that they were not alone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so this stuff represents a little bit more of a difficult topic. These are objects that we collected from the COVID times. So most of these came from a woman who worked at Hurley Medical Center during COVID. These are things that she collected, that her department collected. Some of these came from other sources, but the majority of them are from that. So we have a little bottle of Tito's hand cleanser. Don't know how many people remember, but during the pandemic, there was a shortage of hand sanitizer. And so a lot of companies especially companies that made alcoholic products, would swap to making hand sanitizer. And it says explicitly, for hands only, do not drink. That was a different type of alcohol that people needed. And so we also have a COVID-19 at-home test. This is what I mean by things that people don't think that we would need to collect, that actually do become important to collect to preserve that record. Because if no one kept that, then we just wouldn't have any. No one would have any because you just throw them away when you're done. We have a pin that says, I got vaccinated. That was collected in Genesee County. And then we also have, so I'm saving the cooler stuff for last. We have a mask. If you see these little tags, fun bit of collections lore, this is part of how we number our objects, so that's what that is. We have a mask that basically was worn by a nurse who worked at Hurley Medical Center. And during the pandemic, masks were in short supply, especially N95s, masks that specifically people needed a certain grade of mask to wear. And so to keep being able to use them, they had to be resanitized using UV light. And so every time it got resanitized, they marked the date. And so we have two masks like this, and it just, again, shows kind of that lived experience of what it was like to exist during this time, especially representing our community and the people who were frontline healthcare workers, who were essential workers, and their experience was much different, I think, from the rest of the people who experienced the pandemic.
I mean, that mask is one of the more powerful objects that we've collected during my time here. To think of the things that mask would have seen. Yeah. And then you look at some of the dates on there as I'm looking at this, 3/31. I mean, that's very early on in the pandemic, of course.
Yeah.
Lockdowns come on March 23rd. So at this point, we're 8 days in. Nobody really knows what this bug really is and what it can do by this point. And you have the fear of people who are on the front line of this, not really sure day to day what's going to happen to them.
Right.
Worrying that if they get sick, this is a death sentence.
For some people it was during that time. It was so scary. And this was also during a time when it was very unclear whether wearing masks, I believe this was before they had decided if it was an airborne illness or not. And so the government kept going back and forth on whether people and the CDC, whether there was a mask mandate or not. So such a scary time to have lived through. This mask saw a lot. And then we also, speaking of mask shortages, have a handmade mask that was made by hospital staff from hospital materials during the mask shortage. So basically, they took fabrics from other things that they had a surplus of during the shortage and constructed a mask out of them to be able to continue to work. And it just goes to show the dedication and ingenuity of our community during that time. They didn't have masks, so they made masks. And it's just an impressive level of dedication to caring for the community. These people came in to work in a time that was very strenuous, in an environment that was probably very stressful, very upsetting, and they still came to work and they still helped people.
You know, one thing that I've noticed as we were talking about this with the Hurley staff, as we were collecting, is that everybody has things to say. Everybody has stories. No matter where you fall on the pandemic, no matter where your politics are, all of us have things to say. And I think that we're finally getting to a point where, as a society and as people, we're ready to start unpacking those things, is what I noticed when we were collecting this. And, you know, as a curator, a lot of people don't really understand what curators do. I'm essentially a storyteller. That's what I do. And with each of these objects, there are so many stories that we can tell. I can think of stories from my personal life that pertain to each of these objects that are on the table right now. And that's what's so important with the objects that we accept, is that there's a connection there, and it's relevant to you, and it's relevant to me, and relevant to at least some of the people who are looking at it, that it connects with them in some way. And that's really what makes an exhibit relevant to someone, is that connection. And so that's why it's so important to collect these objects along with the stories.
Exactly. For so many objects, especially older materials that we get, people relate to it by saying like, oh, World War II, my great-grandpa fought in that war. But for things like COVID, people who are alive now, they lived through that. And so the connection is a lot more personal. You're not 3 degrees removed from a person who experienced the thing. You probably experienced the thing.
And it kind of speaks to the reason that we collect. We don't collect the objects themselves. A lot of people think that's what it is, and that's kind of what the focus comes from, I think, on, oh, dinosaur bones or George Washington's sword. No, we're collecting the story behind it and preserving that story.
Exactly.
Which is why contemporary collecting is essential.
I agree.
All right, so you said at the beginning of this, your title is registrar, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit, what does that mean?
Absolutely. So basically, I focus on any incoming donations we have, not monetary ones. Don't let me handle your money. But any collections, donations coming in. So I handle the process for that, which basically people will contact me saying, you know, I have this mask I want to donate. And I'll say, that's great. I have a form for you to fill out, which becomes kind of a running theme. I'm so sorry to people donating, but that's how it goes. So I have them fill out what's called a donation proposal form. It tells us relevant information about the person, about the object, who had it, the story behind it, the condition that it's in, the size, that sort of thing. Once they return that to me, especially if they have photos of the object, then I submit that to our collections committee, and they are a group of people who work at the museum who are from all different departments, and we all look at it together and decide if it fits within our collecting scope, if we can reasonably care for the object. And once we've made a decision on that, then I relay the choice to the donor or potential donor and let them know that we either, yes, we want to go forward with your donation, or I'm sorry, the process stopped here for you. And then after we've decided that we would like it, I contact them. Like I said, I let them know we want it, and we arrange a date for me to meet with them to have them drop it off. We take it into the collection. I have them sign yet more paperwork in the deed of gift, which officially signs it over to us. And then now that we have official custody and the legal option to own it, it's ours. And the donation process kind of stops there. So I handle that. And then as well as that, I handle incoming and outgoing loans from the museum. So if any of these objects were to go to another institution, I would be the go-between for that and handle the logistical process and the collection side of things for making sure that that can happen.
Excellent. So what's the reason behind this entire process?
Right, so a lot of people get confused. I promise it's not just a bunch of hoops to jump through. Basically, we want to make sure that the things we're taking in, because we have such a limited storage space, you know, we don't have the money for the equipment and the personnel to care for every single thing people offer us to the best of the ability that we would want to. And not everything fits within our collecting scope either. Basically, we want to make sure that the stuff that we take in, we can reasonably care for and do it to the best of our ability and keep it in good condition. And we also want to make sure that it fits within the scope that we've decided that our museum collects within. And unfortunately, not everything fits within those 2 categories. And if it doesn't, we say no thank you. But when it does, then usually we determine whether or not, you know, it's redundant within the collection. If we already have, you know, 100 of that pin, then maybe we don't want more of that pin. And then that kind of thing helps weed out things that would otherwise not allow us to collect the things that we might otherwise be missing out on if we were to take in another pin, you know, or another mask.
All right, well, if you're interested in donating any artifacts, if you think you have a story that's connected to Flint or Genesee County history that should be preserved, you can reach Sarah at collections@sloanlongway.org. And what's your phone number?
810-237-3422. Yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with me. This was really fun.
Yeah, no, I loved having a chance to talk about all of these objects that we've collected. I loved talking a little bit more about what you do and maybe helping people understand what our donation process is like.
Me too. Yeah, can't wait to see all the new donations. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us on Discover Uncover. If you would like to contact us because you have a burning question or a topic you really want to hear about, please feel free to reach out to us. The phone number is 810-237-3417. And if you have any other questions or you don't really want to hear your voice on a voicemail, please go ahead and email us at podcast@sloanlongway.org. Thank you so much.